As I'm sure you all know, Avatar the Last Airbender is a really good show. Creators Micheal DiMartino and Bryan Koniezko, I hope I pronounced those names right, managed to craft this show so good that it spawned a sequel show, comics, and even a feature film. Now, if the movie wasn't such a disaster, I expect that Aang would have become just as well known and beloved as Harry Potter himself. That is how good this show is. But, how did it all start? Today, we'll be heading back to the very beginning of Avatar the Last Airbender and analysing the first episode with the intention of discovering what the boy in the iceberg accomplished writing-wise. How did one episode manage to introduce the premise, the cast, and its plot in just 20-ish minutes and then entice us to keep watching? In doing this, hopefully we'll formulate an answer as to how to begin a story. I'll give you a quick hint. It has to do with hooks and promises. The show opens with the
water, earth, fire, air
line, and we are greeted to an extended version of the now iconic prologue that effortlessly introduces all that we need to know to jump right into the plot. We briefly learn that the world is divided into 4 nations, that those nations once lived somewhat peacefully together, and then
everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
It's established that the Avatar, their saviour, disappeared, and characters Katara and Sokka get introduced, through Katara being the one narrating. On a medium such as television, the writers only have around 20 minutes per episode, time that they don't have to slowly set up the very basic exposition. This does not mean that Avatar fails to naturally weave its exposition into the narrative, as we'll see it's quite the opposite. The prologue simply gives us, the audience, the groundwork we need to hit this show running and hooks us into the narrative with an interesting premise. Also, might I add that the stylized animation immediately gives the show's world a richness in culture and expression. The prologue sets up everything in time for the real action to begin. We are first greeted to an establishing shot of a stunning Arctic-like biome. From here, we are introduced to protagonists Sokka and Katara, who at this point have a somewhat difficult relationship. Sokka is arrogant and brash with an ego the size of a big balloon, but he also has the potential to be a great leader, and is fiercely loyal, traits that have been drawn out of the boy as a result of his father asking him to lead the family when he went off to war. Sokka is immature and he tries to be bigger than he actually is. He tries to dominate whenever possible. However, this doesn't work because at heart, Sokka is a bit of a fool, in the best way possible that is. It also doesn't help that at this point in the show, he's somewhat sexist, something that Katara is quick to call him out on. Katara herself is eager to impress her older brother, as seen when she tries to tell him that she's caught a fish, but she's also fed up with Sokka's pestering negative attitude. This is further fueled by Katara's motherliness, for the lack of a better word, a result of her having to take on the motherly role of the family since their real mother was sadly killed. Of course, the intricacies involving their mother's death, or Sokka's role as the oldest male remaining in the tribe, isn't directly stated in this first scene. However, their personality is shown, and a little bit of their backstory is implied through their banter. Apart from introducing 2 of the main characters, this scene performs a couple of other purposes too, so let's look at that. The first purpose is that the scene shows the impact that the war has had on these children. They've been forced to grow up too quickly, resulting in both of them having either controlling or overbearing parts to their personality, despite them only being teenagers, aged 14 and 16 respectively. The other element that gets introduced is the magic system. Through the siblings bickering, which again establishes their relationship, we learn that some people in the water tribe have had access to an ability to harness water. This art, called waterbending, has a negative stigma surrounding it, as conveyed through Sokka calling it,
"If I had weird powers, I'd keep my weirdness to myself."
So, if we're keeping count, this first scene alone introduces 2 of the main cast, gives a snippet of Katara and Sokka's dynamic through their banter, shows how the setting has had ramifications upon their personality, and on top of all that introduces the magic system. And I haven't even spoke about the smaller details, such as how their clothing, weapons and boat do a whole lot to introduce cultural world building. The first scene of Avatar the Last Airbender works so well because it manages to seamlessly introduce a lot of elements of the story and its premise through beginning to explore the characters as believable, flawed people. While the scene that we're about to look at adds even more characterization to Katara and Sokka, they just got a whole paragraph on them, so we'll be mostly focusing on the introduction of Aang here. I will say that Katara fuming up and cracking the ice shows us that 1, she has a temper, and 2, she's extremely powerful, even if she can't control her powers effectively yet. Also, Katara immediately runs up to save Aang in the iceberg, or the boy, while Sokka advises caution. This shows Katara's bravery and willingness to put others ahead of herself, and that Sokka is quite protective and cautious. Following this, a scary, glowing, bold boy explodes the iceberg he's inside and sends off a beam of big blue tesseract-like light, which beckons some stellar shots of the sky and the introduction of the real MVP of the show, Uncle Iroh, baby!
Winter, spring, summer and fall, 4 seasons for love.
Oh, and Zuko's here too, I suppose. I jest. While I absolutely love Iroh, Zuko is arguably the best character in the entire show. No, not arguably. He is the best character. In this first scene, not a lot is revealed about Iroh and Zuko compared to what Katara and Sokka got in their first scene. But we do see that Zuko and Iroh have been searching for the Avatar for a long time, that Zuko is quick to anger, and that the laid-back Iroh just wants Zuko to enjoy life. Of course, the scene establishes that there is another force in the story that will provide conflict, a component that most stories need, in the form of the Fire Nation. We then cut to the freaky monk boy falling off the iceberg, and the boy says that he needs to ask Katara something. Tension is built as the boy struggles to talk. But then, in a subversion of expectations that Rian Johnson himself would be proud of, he says,
"Will you go penguin sledding with me?"
The scene then goes on to unveil Aang as a carefree kid who just wants to enjoy himself. He's also an airbender, a race of people that haven't been since the war started a century ago. Sokka spends the entirety of the scene being paranoid, a complete contrast to his sister, who's delighted by Aang, especially at the prospect of him being a bender. Realizing that the siblings are stranded, Aang offers them a ride home on his sky bison Appa, or Appa. I like to say Appa. We cut to yet another transition where the ice morphs into Zuko's ship, and we quickly learn of Zuko's motivation. It all has to do with his
Honor. My honor.
This is all very important stuff, but it's not really relevant at the moment, so we'll jump back to the others, where Katara asks Aang if he knew what happened to the Avatar, in which Aang replies with an uncharacteristically subdued "no," followed by a distressed look. What isn't Aang telling them? This mystery is further exemplified by a nightmare, in which Aang is caught in a storm and is forced to trap himself in an iceberg in order to save Appa and himself from drowning. A flashback perhaps? All this continues the question of Aang's identity. Why was he in the storm in the first place? And what does he know about the Avatar that he's not telling them? These questions entice the watcher to continue as they promise answers. Aang wakes to find himself in the Water Tribe, and Katara introduces him to the entire village, that being, and I counted, 21 people, including Sokka and Katara, so it's not very large. This scene provides even more understanding of Aang's airbending abilities, while he amuses the village children, which also reiterates that Aang is very much a child despite his mysterious background. Sokka hints that he's jealous of Aang and Katara's powers by saying,
Great. You're an airbender, Katara's a waterbender. Together you can just waste time all day long.
Aang then finds out that Katara is a bender, and she speaks of her belief that Aang is her chance to learn how to harness her powers. Before we continue, let's cover what we've established so far. There's a war going on, and everyone is wondering where this Avatar person is. Katara is a waterbender, and wants to develop her powers. Sokka is her brother and wants to protect what he loves despite not being special in any supernatural way. Aang is an airbender, who mysteriously got trapped in an iceberg and just wants to have fun. However, there is something he's not telling them. On the other hand, there is Zuko and Iroh, a pair from the Fire Nation who are searching for the Avatar. Alright, now that we're on the same page, let's continue. Going back to the ship, Iroh is tutoring Zuko on firebending and claiming that Zuko's lack of discipline is making his form sloppy. We also learn that the Avatar is the last airbender alive, and that he is supposedly over 100 years old. Zuko laments that he will need to know more than basic firebending to take down such a mighty foe. By this point, I'm sure you've all worked out that Aang is in fact the last airbender, and thus also the Avatar. Anyway, Sokka is teaching the only males how to defend the tribe, all of them being very young children. The Southern Water Tribe seems very unprepared for invasions. Sokka gets annoyed at Aang for messing around, stating that there's a war going on, which makes Aang very confused. What war? He states. The next scene has Aang and Katara mess around with some penguins, as Aang said when he first met them, and Aang offers to take Katara to the North Pole, with the hopes of finding a master to teach her waterbending, seeing as she is the only bender in the Southern Water Tribe. Afterwards, they speed down a slope where Katara exclaims,
I haven't done this since I was a kid! You still are a kid!
This continues the theme that was presented earlier, about Katara and Sokka having to grow beyond their years and act older than they are. In a way, to paraphrase a comment that I saw that I'll bring up right now, Aang is bringing freedom to Katara. It really is quite melancholic, but happy at the same time. Afterwards, they encounter a massive abandoned Fire Navy ship, a reminder of the war that's still going. Aang is completely baffled by the ship's existence, and speaks of how he has friends all over the world, including the Fire Nation. Katara realizes that Aang was in the iceberg for 100 years, as it's the only answer to his naivety. They try to leave, but Aang trips on a tripwire, causing a flare to ignite into the sky. They jump out of the ship but are spotted by Zuko through a telescope, who spots Aang for who he truly is, and follows their path to the Southern Water Tribe. Roll credits. So, what did we learn about how to start a story using Avatar's opening episode? The most important thing that the boy on the iceberg does is have a plethora of both hooks and promises. The show hooks the audience into the world with an engaging, relatable and flawed cast, an enticing magic system in the form of bending, and in providing an interesting world and backdrop for the story, that being the war. These hooks build up immediate interest in the program, but how does the show keep people engaged to continue watching? Well, this is done through making promises. The boy in the iceberg gives hints of what is to come in future episodes, and also promises that if we continue watching, the promises will be fulfilled. Part of the reason why Avatar ends up being such a good show is because most, if not all, of its promises are built upon and satisfyingly concluded by the time the final credits roll. But that's the topic for another video. In terms of the promises introduced in this first episode, here are a few examples. Katara's desire to waterbend, Aang's identity, the mystery surrounding the Avatar, and everything surrounding the 100-year-old war. There are also promises relating to the world, such as the mention of the Northern Water Tribe, or of the Airbender's disappearance. And let's not forget Zuko! Why is he searching for the Avatar? What does he mean by reclaiming his honor? There are smaller promises too, such as the scar on Zuko's face promising a story, or Aang's air nomad tattoos and their cultural background and meaning. One final promise to mention is the promise of tone. This episode does a great job of grounding Avatar as a goofy show rich in character depth that is super fun, but also doesn't shy away from darker themes, such as the impacts that war has on people. This whole first episode essentially just introduces promise after promise after promise, which makes us burst with questions and want to continue watching. Of course, it is a responsibility of the rest of the show to slowly unpack them and give satisfying answers, but that can't all be done in just this first episode. What is done is the introduction of hooks with the world and its elements as we follow a few characters meeting a boy in an iceberg, and the promise that if we keep watching, we'll be rewarded with something special. That is what makes Avatar's opening so good, and how you can start a story. Remember, use hooks and promises.